So, hello. So I'm here to tell you about some of the stuff we've been doing in Manchester over the last 6 years. I've spent a lot of time in the last 6 years working with these guys here. We used to be called Larking About, but now we're called the Larks. I won't bore you with the story as to why that is. The other thing I'm doing as well is a PhD at the University of Salford as well. So, basically, I kind of just want to give you an insight into some of the things we've been doing with the Larks and just share some of the projects. I think one of the key things to kind of frame this, I guess, is this idea of going down the rabbit hole. So I guess just wanted to plant that really and just put that in the back of people's heads for this. The first thing to say, though, really, about the Larks is that the majority of us who've been engaged with the Larks are theatre makers. We're from a sort of theatre background, and we're particularly interested in contemporary theatre and experimental theatre. These are just kind of some of the companies that have influenced us over the years. I think the sort of common themes in the type of work that we've all been interested in are technology, participation, experimental work, and really asking kind of the question, what could theatre be and where could it take place? I will talk about games as well. It's not just all going to be about theatre. So that's this is often an influence on us in this work, I think. But this is my problem with theatre. I'll get this off my chest first. This is my problem with theatre. To be a spectator is to be separated from both the capacity to know and the power to act, as Jacques Rancière tells us. And I think that's my issue. I'm fed up of sitting down and not doing anything and having people kind of just pretend they're somewhere else in front of me. And I wonder, with the Larks, whether this is why a lot of us kind of got into video games at an early age. And particularly games like Shenmue here and another type of sort of open world kind of, sandbox type of games. I think we all really like this idea of a living world, and this is something I heard Xbox talking a lot about recently at their unveiling. We sort of love this idea that you can uncover a narrative yourself, by actually doing things. You can act and then know. So this is kind of a big influence for us, really. And about 7 years ago, I guess we asked the question, could we mix the two together? Could we do this in Manchester? Manchester's a living world, isn't it? It's an open world environment. It's got pretty good graphics, I would say. Could we blend live performance with some of the video game structures and ideas? And also, one of the questions was, what about the pervasive possibilities of this? When we switch our video games machine on, we kind of choose to go down the rabbit hole, don't we? We're going, right, I'm going off into this Skyrim world or wherever we're going to go now, and we choose that. We were wondering if we could interrupt people's days and sort of invite them or gently push them down the rabbit hole. So that's kind of just an idea that we started to think about. And our first experiment of this was kind of before the Larks and even before the Larking About. Our first experiment was in 2006 with this piece, No Format. So we chose an area of Manchester called the Northern Quarter, which is kind of a really interesting kind of site. It's lots of old mill buildings, just an interesting place. And we wanted to ask the question, could we create a video game-like narrative and experience on these streets? This first experiment was going to be a linear narrative. And basically, it would see players meeting a series of characters around this area who had each had something stolen, actually stolen by the devil, no less. So it was quite a dark tone sometimes. Each of these players that you would meet, they would need, like in the video game, they would need something from you before they would give you the next piece of information that would lead you through the story. And this is just kind of a rough map of the area. Obviously, the real world is going on while we're trying to do this. So, obviously some weird costumes that you'll see later. But you could get people coming up to a character and saying, what are you doing? And we were quite interested in that way in the video game. When you go and speak to the character who you're not supposed to speak to yet, they kind of go into that loop, or they just repeat the same thing, or they... I think we learned that that's not as easy to do in the public, actually. But we were interested in trying to do that. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about this first experiment. So the first kind of character that you would meet was me. I was the rabbit hole, you might say. I was kind of like the rabbit hole. I was like the bridge or the entry point into this game. So here I am standing in Piccadilly Gardens, which is, these are old clips from a video. I'm standing in Piccadilly Gardens. If you knew about the game, you could come and start the game with me, or I might approach you and try and bring you into the game. And I basically was playing the character of a pirate. I was selling sort of illegal, sort of, downloaded video games on discs, which were all made up. They weren't really games, but I was basically trying to sort of, dodgy salesman trying to sell these things to people. And I'd sort of show them all these games. Obviously, they weren't interested. And then I'd say to them, well, don't worry, I've got a new game. It's on a new format. It's actually called No Format. And then what I would do is I would give them a carrot, and I would give them an envelope, and then I would run off shouting, no sympathy for the devil, bear that in mind, buy the ticket, take the ride. A little Hunter S. Thompson thing there for people. And I would just go off screaming, basically, kind of, run for your lives, save. And obviously, I always wonder what these poor people having their picnic must be thinking at that point. And so the players are left there, basically, with this map, with this carrot. They open up the envelope. There's a map inside. Then they figure out which character they might want to go and meet next. And obviously, if they get the wrong character, they've got to figure out the order to see them in. But actually, the next character that you would meet was the rabbit. And the rabbit had lost its bounce. It was not a happy rabbit. The devil had stole the rabbit's bounce. But luckily for you, you had a carrot, of course, by this point. And we all know rabbits like carrots. So you gave the carrot to the rabbit, got its bounce back, had a little bit of a dialogue with you. And then it would give you some batteries. I'd love to tell you more detail about the story, but I kind of just want to get through it, I guess. The next character you'd meet after that was the femme fatale, who was this kind of beautiful 1920s sort of character sat outside of a coffee shop. And she'd lost her voice. The devil had stolen her voice. So she was sat there with this sort of tape recorder, and she was desperately sort of trying to get people to come to her and pointing at it. And of course, you had some batteries by this point, didn't you? So you could put the batteries in and play it, and there's her voice. And you learn about her, and learn about what happened to her, and learn about her affair with the next character, who was the cowboy. Now, the cowboy was very, very, very sad because he'd lost his mojo. We still don't really know what mojo means, but we were sure he'd lost it. And he needed cheering up. Now, luckily, we all know that cowboys like a bit of line dancing, a bit of country and western. And luckily, when you gave the batteries to the femme fatale, she actually gave you some dance instructions, very simple line dance. And so you'd learn this dance, and then you'd go to the cowboy and invite him to dance with you, and obviously that would cheer him up, give him a bit of his mojo back, and he would tell you where to go next, which was a phone box. So he'd just direct you to a phone box, and you go to the phone, and the phone would ring, and the devil was on the end. And the devil would be like, I've seen what you've been up to, I'm not very happy about this. And he'd invite you to a final challenge where you would play for your soul. The other thing to say at this point is, unbeknownst to the players, at this point in the game, there's actually someone taking a Polaroid photo of them at a distance. That will be important for a second. So you have this conversation with the devil. He tells you to go to the pub, a pub called the Bay Horse, and this little beer garden at the back, which is called the Secret Garden, which is kind of magical in itself, isn't it? So go and meet the devil in the Secret Garden. And when you get there, he's kind of sat, he's there, that's the guy sitting down with all the other characters, and he unveils a game of Connect 4, and he explains to you that we're gonna now play for your soul. And he reveals a photograph of you, of course, and says, I have your soul here, and now we're going to play for it over a game of Connect 4, and if you win the game of Connect 4, you get to keep your soul, and if not, the devil keeps it. We actually did a second version of this at one point where someone got very, very upset when they lost, I have to say. So that's just kind of a quick example of where we kind of first started, I guess, really. And that was years ago. Let's move forward to 2011 and the apocalypse. I don't know if you know, the world actually ended in Manchester in 2011. Well, it nearly ended if it wasn't for the brave warriors of Manchester who came out that day to save it. But there's a long-running joke in Manchester, actually. On the sixth day, God created Manchester. And so we kind of thought, well, if he started it here, then he'd probably want to finish it here. So we wanted to make a game about the apocalypse. But this time we wanted to try a bit more of a non-linear approach. We wanted to do a longer game. We had more resources. We could use the whole city this time. The game took pretty much most of the day. there were kind of more entry points into the game. You didn't just have to come to one character to start. You could engage with characters and then kind of, come in at different angles, basically. There were 3 storylines in this one as well. Each one would give you something that you needed for the end of the world. So one storyline would give you a weapon that you would need, which is actually a song that you would have to learn to scare the horsemen of the apocalypse off, which we'll come to later. The next storyline would give you some armor, which would protect yourself, and also some placards to protest at the end of the world. And then the final thing you needed, of course, was the time and location of where this was going to go down in Manchester. And so you'd play these 3 storylines and hopefully get to the end of the day and save everyone from the end of the world. So I'm just going to show you a few of the types of things that you might have experienced on that day. These were scientists who were kind of in Piccadilly Gardens, and they were doing experiments to kind of prove that the fabric of reality was breaking down, and they were proving that the world was going to end in Manchester here. This is the bit here where people were invited at one point in the city to go and make placards of things that they wanted to save. Someone wanted to save their teddy there, of course, the most important thing to save at the end of the world. This is another section here where you had to wear these go around a park and wear these headphones and try and move around the park. Don't ask me how technologically this worked, but you had to move around the park and try and tune in. There was a particular place in the park where you could tune into the right station and get the location and the time of the end of the world. There was a character here, the black dog. She would give you riddles to complete before she would give you what you needed next. And then at the end of the day, of course, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse show up in Manchester. We actually hired these guys. You can see where the budget went on this. These guys are actually Lord of the Rings, believe it or not. So these are the same guys. And so the end of the day, everyone gathers there. These 4 horsemen appear. Everyone sings their song, tries to scare them off. And then they sort of ride off into the distance and everyone's won. So what was I doing in all this? Well, if you were in a place called St. Anne's Square in Manchester, on the day that we did this, you would probably have come across this character here. Now, basically, I was a doomsayer. So I was standing in St. Anne's Square and I was going, the world is going to end, repent now, repent. And I was doing that kind of classic sort of doomsayer thing. And I was getting some really interesting responses from the public. Some people really weren't happy with what I was doing and wanted to argue and even fight at one point. But there is one quick anecdote I really want to share, actually, about this moment. There's a phone shop in St. Anne's Square, there used to be, and these 2 young guys come out on the Saturday morning, it was a Saturday, and they come out and they've bought their phones, and they must have just woken up that morning thinking, this is going to be a normal day. We're going to go into town, we're going to just get a couple of things, we'll go home, normal Saturday. Little did they know that they would bump into me there and find out that the world was going to end and find out that they could do something about it. And then by the end of their day, they'd kind of gone through this whole adventure, gone down the rabbit hole, and were amongst this crowd at the end of the day, ready to fight off the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So I kind of really love that way we just interrupted these 2 guys' days, and gave them this whole experience. And I think they seem to really enjoy it as well. So I'm going to move on to another piece of work which we did last year, which is called Hacked Off. So this time we wanted to try and address something a bit more political, but we also, because we were theatre makers, we're always really kind of conscious that we don't always get the game mechanic side of the game design thing, and it's something we're always trying to develop a bit more. So we wanted to just try to bring a bit more of a game mechanic into it, but we also wanted to do something that was a bit more political, as well as kind of giving a narrative to it. The piece was actually a response to the whole newspaper journalism scandal in the UK over the last few years. All these journalists hacking into people's phones and all the terrible things they were doing just to get a story. And of course there was a big public inquiry, the Leveson inquiry. We basically wanted to respond to this with a kind of a game type experience. I've got a short video here which was just a few collections of things, basically, video clips that might just give a bit of an insight into kind of what the game was. I'm the editor, and I'm always on the lookout for, people like us, really. People who don't have a lot of morals, are willing to go out there, get their hands dirty, to do a good job. Yeah? the idea is that the narrative of it is basically that we represent a newspaper called The Daily Hack. We're holding interviews today to find new hackers who can come and get us stories. And the way that we're going to interview you is to put you through a role-play experience where you're going to be a private eye. You've got stories of a celebrity you represent you've got to try and protect. But you've also got to try and get the stories off the other private eyes who are playing in the game. Now, when you start this game, Trisha is going to give you a pack each. And in that pack, you've got lots of things, but the main thing is this card here, which has got 3 stories about your celebrity client. And you must keep these stories close to your chest. Don't let anyone find this information out. It's very, very key. But obviously, you're private investigators, and I need you to be hackers. So, while keeping that information safe, I need you to try and hack and find out the information of the other people playing in the game, okay, about their celebrity clients, so we can put it on the front page and make some money. Around this gameplay area, you're going to find 7 mobile phones that look like this, okay? These are the things you're going to use to get your information. So yeah, I'd love to have more time just to tell you a bit more about how you played that. You may have noticed people were chasing each other. The idea was that you couldn't get caught hacking, of course, and obviously journalists were all kind of out to get each other and expose each other in the game. One of the things we did, though, which I think is more interesting, hopefully, is we put this feedback part to the end of the game. We kind of included the Leveson inquiry, and we invited people to give feedback to the Leveson inquiry. And actually, when we first came up with this, it was just a tool to get feedback on our game. And I think we were all really surprised with how people wanted to join along in the satire. They wanted to start performing, start acting almost at times. And I think this is really interesting. And it wasn't expected at all. You know, we just needed some documentation just so we could develop our work. And I think it's become real prominent in our work now, finding ways for the audience to play along, to go further down that rabbit hole with us. I've put together just some examples of the best ones, basically, of people who kind of were really getting into it and really sort of enjoying the satire with it. I'm gutted that Victor still isn't here, actually, because there's a little cameo for him in a second. But
Well, hacking was my favourite course in journalism school, and it was lovely to have an opportunity to put it into practice.
And I managed to not tell any of my stories, not that I have any stories.
I feel cut out for this career, you know.
I couldn't possibly comment.
Okay.
Fetishes to do with high heels and whipped cream.
Should be known by everybody. I think it's to the advantage of the nation.
I couldn't possibly comment.
Okay.
Well, you can understand why it's so addictive to be that reckless.
I'd like to refer that question to my legal team and get back to you on that. If I could submit my response in writing. Brilliant. You know, we're not going to name names at this point, but some really juicy information is out there.
The equivalent would be driving on 50 tons of cocaine.
I couldn't possibly comment.
And I hope I get the job.
Someone can tell Victor he got the job. He's got the job. So this really interests me. You know, we're kind of, you know, we saw these people kind of just wanting to play along, and I think this is going to feature more in our work in the future, somehow. Just if you're wondering what the collar was, Rebecca, I don't know if you know who Rebecca Brooks is. She was one of the people involved in this whole scandal, and it was actually advised to her that she should wear a collar, a white collar, to make herself look more innocent. And so that became known as the collar of innocence, basically. And again, I'm really fascinated by just a clipboard with literally a paper napkin, and suddenly you get all that from people, you know, and it's really interesting. I'm going to close this with another quotation from Jacques Rancière. I'm just going to throw this out there. So he says that the spectator must be released from passivity. He must be confronted with the spectacle of something strange, which stands as an enigma and demands that he investigate the reason for its strangeness. And so, yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that.